So welcome, everyone. My name is Mary Kozub, and I'm the Director of Education here at the Birchfield Penny Arts Center. And I'm delighted you've joined us this evening. Thank you so much. This is the book club at the center. And as many of you know, the book club at the center has been in existence since 2011 when a lovely docent who's no longer with us, Jane Roubaix, thought it was important that we read the works of art that our beloved Charles Birchfield read. And that's how the book club got started. Since then, we have pivoted to reading books written by authors from Western New York, which is fully in keeping with the center's mission to support and celebrate the many talents of artists, poets, dancers, and authors who are our neighbors and our friends. And since that time, we've had the honor of meeting over 90 authors and many, many books as they come and share their stories with us. And I can't wait for you to meet this evening's author, Christina Miletti, who was recommended by her husband, Dimitri.
That's for the last time you recommended me.
Well, I'm glad he did, because I thoroughly enjoyed the books. But first, I'm going to turn things over to Michaela, who will just briefly tell you the mechanics of tonight's.
So I record it, so this will go on YouTube, on our YouTube page.
Sure.
I'll get that up either tomorrow or next week. And for the Mary and Marian, if you have questions, please just unmute yourself and you can ask them.
So welcome, Christina. I'm really excited that you're here tonight. And I'm really excited to have an opportunity to delve into your novel, Chokebox, a Femme Noir, with you. I'm sure it'll be much more fun with you than reading it at home alone. The book won the Juniper Prize for Fiction from the University of Massachusetts Press. I'd like to formally introduce Christina. She's an author whose articles and stories have appeared in many journals and anthologies, including Harcourt's Best New American Voices, the Iowa Review, the Masters Review, Best Emerging Writers, Denver Quarterly, the Cincinnati Review, Alaska Quarterly, and all around the country there. American Letters and Commentary, as well as many, many more. Her first book, The Religious and Other Fiction, a collection of stories, was published by Carnegie Mellon University Press. Christina has recently completed a new collection called Now You See Her, which I read a little bit. It's about a magician or kissing a magician.
That's one of the stories is, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
With the help of a fellowship from UB's Humanities Institute and a residency at Marble House Project, which I looked up. The Marble House Project, it looked like a lovely place
It's
to
amazing.
be.
Yeah.
Is a multidisciplinary artist residency program in Dorset, Vermont. She is an associate professor of English at the University of Buffalo, where she is the director of the creative writing program and the co-curator of the Exhibit X fiction series, which I also looked up. So it showcases experimental and innovative fiction. It's based at Hall Walls. It's for UB students and for the wider Western New York community. So thank you so much for coming tonight. I have one more thing to add. Christina recently won the patron prize from Thorn Willow Press, who published her winning short story, The Girling Season, in a special letterpress chapbook edition. It is one of the stories in her new, almost completed collection called Nice Nice. So I'm really delighted to welcome you this evening. And again, I'm really anxious to hear a little bit about what you have to say about Chokebox, which is
all the things.
I'll say what it was an absolute joy to read. And I do a lot of reading, as my husband, who just joined us, will attest to. I don't read 2 books a week, but I definitely read 2 books a month. And at my age, that's a lot of books. And
It's always a lot of books.
One that I really, really enjoyed reading. The best way to describe it is that it was totally confounding, but it was also very buttery. It was easy to slide through and read through, and word over word. It was just really quite elegant and eloquent. So thank you. I totally have enjoyed it.
Say thank you.
For those of you who have not read it yet, I encourage you to do so. And you will I wish you had read it because we could have quite a lively conversation, but it's kind of like a roller coaster ride, Alfred Hitchcock movie. You're not quite sure what's true, what's made up, what's,
The narrator is a bit cagey.
yes, yes, very much so. So would you like to give a little bit of a synopsis of the book or the
Sure.
premise of the book?
I'll say, want to give a synopsis, and then I could also maybe, if you want, I mean, you had said I could leave this up to Oliver, but I could just read the opening chapter, which sort of sets.
I think so.
the stage.
It's,
Would that be good?
yeah, that'd be wonderful. And then everyone will have a sense of who Joan is.
Yeah, and this is like the key sort of launching place in many ways for the book. So it might be, and it's short, it's just a couple pages. And will maybe give you a flavor for what the book is trying to accomplish. But I was very intrigued by thinking about women narrators who maybe weren't always telling the truth, because we tend to have lots of sort of deceptive male narrators who kind of, tell all kinds of different stories in all the genres, but we don't often have female narrators that are trying to tell one story by telling another, or perhaps incapable of telling the truth, perhaps are outright lying. And I want to sort of explore that terrain a little bit. But the narrator is a woman named Jane Tanlin, and the sort of base facts of the novel are that she's been accused of doing away with her husband, but she claims he just disappeared. And when she says he disappeared, she means that literally he kind of just disappeared from their lives, while at the same time continuing to control them through what he was writing wherever he was. That he's a writer, he was writing this, or he was trying to be a writer, he's writing his memoir, and whatever he was writing, wherever he was kind of controlling his family's ongoing lives. And so this book is meant to be a counter memoir. She's writing it from where she's been involuntarily incarcerated right next door at the Buffalo Psychiatric Center. So this book is supposed to be the truth. She's going to tell it all and tell it true, except that the deeper you get into it, it becomes clear that whatever the truth is, Jane might actually be incapable of telling it for all kinds of different reasons. And but at the same time, she is simply telling a truth that's worth listening to. The book represents sort of that trajectory of her trying to reveal the truth, and our efforts to kind of pull the many threads of what is true and what's not. While at the same time, she's kind of living her, kind of writing to us on the sly, because she's not supposed to have a pencil where she's been incarcerated. And so she tells us a lot about what she's reading while she's there in these little bits called library encounter times, which are called lets. And she calls them that sort of ironically, since she's not really allowed to do or let to do anything. So what she does is she explores ideas through readings, but everything that she reads kind of comes back to her own situation. So she could be reading about fig trees and she's thinking about her husband and possibly doing away with him. She could be reading about the medieval use of forks, and same thing. So anything she reads comes back to this very specific situation that happened in her house, which launched this entire situation. So what I will read is the very beginning of the book, which is sort of sets the mood of her voice, and the threat she poses, but also the dread that she feels. So there's, you kind of hopefully kind of get the tension between those two moods that exist possibly in a marriage. That's why I'm joking about the fact that my husband recommended.
Well, I'm just saying, when your husband writes, does everything come true for you in your life? I hope not. His book was a little dark too.
It's a little eerie sometimes, little uncanny sometimes. The way things that you write do in fact sort of begin to either unfold in your life in certain ways. When I wrote this book, we both had offices on the second floor of our former house. But at some point, he then went upstairs, after I was like on the way to writing it, he then went upstairs to the attic to finish it because we had toddlers at the time. And, so he kind of disappeared up, it's like one of those things like, oh, wait, did I make that happen? Wait, who's the person who's really telling the truth or controlling people with their words? And then.
We're recording this now.
Oh, geez. Yeah, he's heard it all already. There's a very cranky wife in his last book, and I was like, oh, do you want to tell me something? And then the metaphor for the book, the choke box, refers to the larynx, because humans are virtually the only animal on the planet that can choke to death on their food. Because we have both a throat as well as an esophagus, and they're covered by the little flap, laryngeal flap that sort of guides air or food to go to the stomach or to the lungs. It's all fine if you're just eating or just talking, but when you talk into it at the same time, the flap can get a little stuck, and that's why when people get experience choking. Animals don't have that problem. They have completely two different airways, or they're just separate between their nose and their mouth and so on. So they can get things stuck, but they don't really necessarily choke in the same way that humans do. And what's interesting about that, if you think about it, which is one of the central metaphors of the book, is that language in some ways is one of the many things that actually kills us. It can kill us, that if you're talking while you're eating, it's the making of words that can be the death of you. And so, it was kind of, as for a writer, that seems to be a pretty ripe metaphor to explore. So I ended up that was actually the kind of the launching pad for the book. When I read that, it's like, what kind of story can I write about that? And one of the many things that I like to think about is sort of women characters, girl characters, invisible women, disappearing women. And so lots of my stories have these kinds of characters kind of woven within them. So this was just an extension of that. So the epigraph to this book, it's written by Gertrude Stein. There are so many ways in which there is no crime. I'll talk a little bit more about that after. I'm going to try to make sure this is short, so I don't want to keep you guys with reading, but thought maybe this would be useful. So the first chapter is called The So-Called Butter Knife Affair. The assault that took place 2 years ago on the reasonably bright morning of April 11, what's today's date?
Not quite yet, love it.
Oh, so close. Wasn't the incident that led to my incarceration. The so-called butter knife affair, as the nurses here call it, wasn't responsible for my family's downward spiral, as court documents allege. Yet the board at Buffalo Psychiatric highlights the episode at every hearing, on every file. For them, the day with my son is the pivotal moment in the incomplete history I've compiled here, the linchpin whose sudden collapse led to my family's swift and complete devolution. I've tried to explain to the board that they're far off the mark. I've pointed out other forces, factual and spectral at work, but the truth blunts my tongue. My words are rough and fur-coated. Somewhere my husband writes, the truth will not set you free. I try to be forgiving. I remind myself I'd have to be a sylvan-tongued, svelte, and at least 10 years younger to convince the men and women who now own my life, the tired nurses in their cheerful, bleach scrubs, the board of myopic doctors who mind them, that my assault of a 10-year-old boy over blueberry pancakes took place as they say, just not the way they think. Since it's my son's interests they have at heart, I brace myself each time they read excerpts from the police report to me. A boy and his mother alone in a kitchen, the boy sitting down at the table whole, then rising from it bloody and damp, not 10 minutes later, a butter knife buried up to its hilt in the lean muscles of his taut, hairless thigh. The puddle of blood at his feet deep enough and thick enough that when a house cat later dipped her paws in it, the blood filled in the prints at once, congealing where she bent over the lip of the pool to sample her young master's pap. It's all there in the record, the board reminds me. What they never acknowledge. I told the officer working the case, a Lieutenant Jaffe, if memory serves, those details myself. You think that would be enough to convince them I've nothing to hide. Instead, they focus on what they call related fine points, like an aging bustle of slow-moving ants fretting over the frayed edges of a bent doily. Where? Board member three asks, as though he's never asked the question before, did the butter knife come from? And why? BMI chimes in, board member one. Inside joke, when you read it, BM looks like a BM, so BM1 chimes in. Did you cancel your doctor appointment? He hesitates, flips through my file. A standing chiropractic appointment just minutes before the incident. He deploys the word dryly. Happened. BM6 doesn't wait for an answer. His voice is as yellowed and faded as the pages of an old book. Both my counselor and I must lean in to hear him. Please characterize, he says, not even trying to project his thin, reedy voice, your husband's relationship with Regina Hammond. To this, BM3 adds at once, and describe your mood since your daughter was born. Naturally, I have answers to all their questions. The board has heard them before. Now they will hear them again. The repetitions, not the replies themselves, are the focus of our Wednesday morning meetings. Perhaps I'll change my story, they think. Perhaps then they'll catch me out. But how do you catch out the truth? So I'll just stop there. You get the idea that, something kind of terrible has happened in her kitchen. It's supposed to be an ordinary moment, an ordinary breakfast, with the mother and son. And instead this horrible thing happens where the butter knife somehow flies across the room and, he gets hurt very badly. He's fine. And there's a whole sort of, the chapter continues forward with, him getting to the hospital and just getting a couple stitches and so on. But at that moment, she kind of gets on the radar of people that something might not be going on. And then her husband is missing. And so because of this one incident, they start investigating her or believing that she had something to do with her husband's disappearance. But what she claims is that whatever he's writing upstairs is actually made that knife fly across the room. It had nothing to do with her. It's frankly unbelievable, but the more you listen to her, the more you begin to wonder, well, what's going on with that husband anyway? So it kind of just puts a lot of things in the air and so that you begin to think more about the nature of relationships than really trying to size up guilt or like who did what. So it's not meant to be a whodunit, it's meant to be a memoir. You're kind of playing with the idea or the sonic sound of memoir, then it became femme noir, so that it took on this sort of darker quality that characterizes the novel.
Well, a piece of it is that she's, what's the word I want? I've lost it already. She's hospitalized against her will,
Yeah.
which takes a lot.
Mhm.
But in the story, as it's told, they're just repeating the same thing, holding on to her for a long period of time.
I do, we could get into the fine legal points of like what it actually takes to, get someone incarcerated. And I leave that a little hazy in the
Yeah.
novel for all kinds of reasons. One of which is that I'm less interested in that than the fact that this is supposedly happening to her, right? And what she's really capable of telling us anyway is not always clear.
I happen to work at a variety of places, but one psychiatric center where people were kept beyond longer terms of time than any other place in the country.
Wow.
And those kind of scenarios behind the scenes would be what would be occurring. So it's like, or somebody might mess with somebody's medication to make them stay longer.
Yeah.
It's really bizarre.
Yeah. I think once you're in a vulnerable position like that, anything can really happen. Other people start controlling your lives. And so I guess I wanted to put her in a very vulnerable position or to reflect on other vulnerabilities that she'd also experienced.
Well, it's done. You wrote it really well, and it leaves those great pieces just like standing out like the elephant in the room. It's like,
Yes.
wait, and you want to pull yourself into having a solution.
Yeah, it's true. You want to solve her life for her. And I think part of the issue is that some of these things are definitely unsolvable. You have to kind of live with that discomfort for sure. Yeah.
Every question doesn't have an answer.
Yeah.
And I looked at it in terms of themes, like there are some broad themes with little sub themes under them. And because you can't just like a lot of authors come in and will say, well, why did they, when they met on the beach, did they know they were going to fall in love?
Mhm.
There are no answers like that.
I
We
really
don't-
try to avoid those kinds of.
Yeah, well, you did an excellent job at avoiding those. Really excellent job.
It's, yeah.
So certainly disappearing
Yeah.
is an
Mhm.
overriding theme. The cat disappeared, right?
Mhm.
But then the cat was there licking the blood.
Mhm.
Was it the same cat?
Mhm.
I don't know.
Well, I think,
The cat was dropping the mouse off
Right.
in neighbor's house.
right, I think, right, it's supposed to, yeah, right, so time sometimes slips like that. And I think the cat, I think you're right, when did the cat disappear? I think this takes place before the cat actually disappears. If I was gonna try and like look at the chronology.
Well,
I
it's
probably
not
have an hour.
linear. There is no
Yeah,
line,
Yeah, yeah,
timeline where you could drop things,
right.
happenings into.
Right, and of course, she thinks that the woman that her husband's likely having an affair with did something to the cat as well, right? So, it's mostly, I think the story itself in many ways is just super simple. She thinks her husband is doing things that are making her life with her family untenable. And because of that, and that's probably true, right? You know, probably things needed to change in this relationship, but instead of like solving that problem, it becomes all these other problems as well instead, and spins out in all kinds of what she calls spectral ways. So the ordinary becomes extraordinary. As things sometimes do when we kind of focus on them for too long instead of solving them, just kind of stay focused on them for too long. And so that's sort of the core, but then because I'm kind of interested in these larger, you know, I don't know, philosophical questions, we'll call it for lack of a better word, I was able to kind of pull in lots of other ideas as well. So for instance, I don't know if any of you have read sort of The Yellow Wallpaper by any chance, sort of if you like stories about what can happen in sort of psychiatric centers. I mean, this is was written by the wife of a 19th century psychiatrist. They parted ways, but it's sort of a Gothic story about a young woman who, after the birth of her baby, kind of begins to, she's probably experiencing postpartum, is probably, you know, if we were going to put a finger on what's going on, but sort of loses, is not feeling well, is feeling depressed. And so instead of being allowed to occupy herself with work or gardening or anything, her husband tells her she should go rest in this like this room in the attic. And the more she rests, the more she kind of loses her grip of reality. And then the more she loses the grip, the more they begin to like lock the door. So, you know, by the end of the short story, you know, she's been staring at the yellow wallpaper in this particular room so long that she begins to see a woman that's in the wallpaper, a woman who's trying to get out. And, you know, if you read it, it's a story that's taught a lot in all kinds of different classes in the English department around the country, in English departments around the country, even now. You know, it can be read as a kind of psychological journey. You know, she is the one behind the walls,
yeah.
right? It can be read as sort of an early Gothic or a, you know, kind of an American Gothic story and so on. That's sort of this part of the genre. And it's all, you know, been very influential on sort of feminist literature as well. So it's, it was one of the stories that I was thinking about, like what kind of yellow wallpaper still exists if that's not colored by sort of the Gothic, that we can kind of take and put all the kind of contemporary suburban mini mansions and, you know, you know, a kind of contemporary city. What kind of Gothic story can still happen in a contemporary city, in our contemporary moment?
That farmhouse itself was a character in the book too.
Right, because it's the last, it's, I was thinking about the ways in which sort of developments happen, especially in like, and I think particularly in Clarence, like you just see like these big farms still sort of kind of being swallowed up by, and also like I guess East Amherst is still happening too, but kind of being swallowed up by, you know, by developers who, you know, kind of make a neighborhood. All of a sudden,
Right.
a neighborhood will exist. This family had decided to live in this farmhouse that was is like the last historic home in this area, and for all kinds of reasons, they weren't able to sell it or take advantage of it. So they're this kind of, little historic farmhouse surrounded by the mini mansions as well. So they're kind of always being looked at, always, the entire neighborhood sort of waiting for them to move, even as sort of their relationship inside the farmhouse is sort of devolving. So there's all kinds of eyes on them as well, even their own and sort of internal, even as she's processing their relationship internally. Yeah. Yeah.
The other theme I came up with, and you could tell me how close I am, or like the mysteries, like Jules or her brother, who wrote those books. Why is he famous? Is she really the ghostwriter in the story? Where is he now? Did he also disappear?
Yeah, so, right, so she presents herself as a wife and mother. But in fact, as the book continues on, we learn that she does have her own writerly history, which is one of the reasons she's able to kind of compile this counter memoir so effectively. And you folks have probably heard of the term Shakespeare's sister, right? What would have happened if Shakespeare had had a sister? Will we still be reading her works? And so on. And so I was thinking about the idea of ghostwriting, which still exists, all the time. Many famous people, some of whom were presidents that did not write their memoirs, right? Quite famously. In any case, the idea here is that she too was a ghostwriter in her family as a child, and at the time I was I was doing a lot of researching on hoaxes, literary hoaxes, which there are quite a few of, and just sort of thinking about various people who had written books that were entirely false in order to get a sizable paycheck. Alternatively, people had posed, it was the kind of the famous sort of J.T. Leroy literary hoax, where in effect, a middle-aged woman had posed as a traumatized young man who was writing short stories that emerged from his experience of abuse. And she was able to wrap up the entire publishing industry in her work, as well as many well-known celebrities. She had hired someone to pose as this person, because authors have lots of events, and this actor would go and just kind of be dressed in, not really allow his face to be seen, and would not speak, but would just sort of attend. And so, this kind of went on for years until someone was able to, kind of crack open the case and kind of reveal that, the writing was the writing, but it was not being written by J.T. Leroy. It was being written by someone with a completely different agency altogether. So I was kind of fascinated by this. I was fascinated by, what it means to attain celebrity through writing, right? Which seems to me two distinctly different kinds of enterprises, though often isn't, right, these days. In the age of selling your book, when you're talking to a publisher, they have you fill out all these kinds of marketing questionnaires, and they want to know about your social media presence, as well as everything else, and so, with all things being told, if they have two good books, they want someone with a greater social media presence. So these things begin to count. I mean, I get it. It's just a completely, it's a unexpected element of the paradigm of publication that one also has to have some celebrity before getting published in order to achieve the kind of celebrity of some of our very, best known authors these days. So it's kind of like, in order to write, you already need to be published, which this is the kind of ironic puzzle that kind of drives my thinking sometimes when I'm trying to write a story. So you might see where the sort of the intricacies of this maybe came about. But in any case, so the little subplot of Jules is that his momager mother is able to convince the publishing industry that her teenage son, actually it might have even been a tween at the time, I can't recall, I think it was teen, like he was like 13 or something. I can't just remember what age I settled on the end, but that he was writing these books. And in fact, and she was selling them as his writing, but in fact, it was his older sister, the narrator of this, who was not much older than him, who was in fact something of a kind of savant, as an older teenager, writing books in her brother's voice so that her mother could sell them. But because their entire livelihood depended on this kind of arrangement, she never says anything. So she becomes a ghostwriter in her own life, so that no one really knows what's going on. But this has kind of implications on on her young brother's life, and he I don't know. He does not have a happy ending, put it that way, which is one of the many things that colors her as she kind of moves into adulthood, and she doesn't want to write anymore. So this is the very first thing she's written in years, and the idea is that, this is true, as opposed to everything else that she was writing, except as you read it, you're like, this can't be true. And so you're kind of stuck in that conundrum all the time of what is real, what is the truth, and how do we know it when we see it? Supposedly.
And just one of the many secrets
Yeah.
that are in the book. Because secrets is another thing that there's, I love that she found a leaf that was stuck on a nurse's shoe, and she hid that as though it was a little treasure, because she needed, I'm thinking she needed something of her own. So.
Yeah, absolutely. You think about the sterility of hospital rooms and things like that. And at the time I was actually in hospital rooms a lot with one of my kids. And so, yeah, that idea of kind of personalizing a space, like what makes a space your home, right? And it's someone that has lived in it, historic houses since I was basically kind of I guess I was older than an adult per se, but the house that we were living in, the old Elmwood Village for 20 years, I could go to the History Museum and see who lived there. In fact, one of the owners was Lockwood, I think it's a John T. Lockwood. In any case, the fellow, the book collector, I believe he was a lawyer that endowed, University of Buffalo with one of their libraries. So it was one of those, is it secrets, or is it sort of just the way you experience sort of the constant sort of deja vu turning of your life? But here I was at University of Buffalo, and I did not find out about the connection to Lockwood for, I don't know, at least 7 or 8 years into living there. And then, I found it out, and then curiously, the librarian of the poetry collection there, the rare books room, one of our doctoral students was working with him, actually ended up writing like a whole a history of Lockwood's life, which he ended up giving me. So I got to read, he had found other articles and so on that I was able to experience. But, just kind of like living someone else's choices in your home, right? Our first home had these enormous, we believe they were meant to look like opera settings, enormous canvases in the dining room. We think one of the former owners used to do stage sets from one of the theaters in town, and they were of ships and sailing. We would adore them, and then we'd be like, what is this? What are we living with? Who chose these? And clearly, and someone told us that the painter died before he finished them, because some of the other, most of them matched, but there were 2 or 3 that were decidedly of a different aesthetic. They were very fantastical, had these really cool, funky fish and, like mermaids and things on them. They were much more pleasant to the eye. They were really much more interesting than the very staid kind of ships sailing off into the distance and things like that. I don't know who they are. There was no way of figuring out, what the provenance of those were or anything like that. And so you're kind of living in someone else's history, but you don't know who that person is. So who chose that? Who designed that? And yet I'm literally saturated by it. And I mean, that's kind of a metaphor for, living in a country, in a city, like what are the choices that have come before us that are coloring the way we see things now?
Well, I think that was one of my questions too, because her husband, what was his name, Ed? Ed Parks, perhaps? No,
Ed Park is the.
I know. He's been here. with
Yes, oh,
us.
good, he's
Yeah.
great.
His family is a mystery too. And his family, I mean, he somewhere in the book, it talks about how, or maybe he was, part of his writing is that the family vanished, or maybe that was why he needed to write,
Mhm,
because the family that vanished, the town they lived in
Mhm.
vanished.
mhm,
And so he was trying to rebuild
Mhm.
his own
mhm.
sense of self or
Mhm.
sense of history
Yeah.
by writing this
Mhm.
memoir, his memoir.
Mhm, mhm.
So
Yeah, I'm.
another thing that slipped
Yeah.
away.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so interested about like, who are our neighbors, who are the people we, what are our histories, right? And our country is so curious that way, and I don't, we don't think we give enough credit, but, I'm second generation Italian, so, all my grandparents, emigrated here and I'm deeply interested in the immigrant experience. And so that was part of, Dimitri was born in Greece and came over when he was 4, and so, and and all of these people, experienced war, experienced hardship, as we do here as well. And so I think it was important to me to kind of inflect the book a little bit that way, and that we all have histories, that are maybe not always, worn on our sleeves, sometimes they are, sometimes they're very visible, other times they're, we call them, you called them secrets before, which I like, but, there are histories, just, we just can't read it all at once, as it were, when we meet someone. So, it was just a way of giving him some character and, bringing in, sort of the larger world perspective into this kind of very small, very focused history of this one family in this farmhouse in the middle of Clarence. And yet, if you peel it back like an artichoke, that's again one of the memory metaphors in the book. The idea that the choke is the center, right, of a vegetable, right? If you think about how an artichoke is peeled back, all of its layers. The idea was that they're at the center, but that there is this much larger world that is that they are embedded in.
I want to hog all the comments, so.
A simple question that everybody asks, and I never ask, but I'm gonna ask. How'd you go about preparing for the book?
How I go.
I mean, what you do, what your life background is, kind of says a lot.
It's true. I teach contemporary literature, in addition to creative writing. And so, I guess, a good part of my interest, I teach contemporary literature. I tend to teach more, women's lit, which is, kind of connecting, certain voices through time together. The way contemporary literature used to conventionally be taught was by period, what is postmodern, what is modern, what is Victorian, what is post-human now, things like that. And I was kind of more interested in thinking about antecedents, like, what did Gertrude Stein write that inflected or, kind of set off the next writer? How are these writers connected to each other and in what ways? And, can we make like a family tree? Can we Harold Bloom, wrote that book, The Anxiety of Influence, which is, male authors killing off their predecessors. I was more interested in like, how can we recover predecessors and celebrate them and make connections, and, maybe not always, the connections don't always have to be pleasant times. Any kind of relationship can be fraught. But one of the things I end up doing in this book at the back, is, I had some, this was just me being playful, but she offers these kind of diagrams called memoir and counter memoir, which are meant to be quotes lifted from Ed's book and quotes lifted from hers, but in fact are just some of my favorite lines from some of my favorite women authors, many of whom are living. So it's always fun to like show up at a place and read the book, and that person will be in the audience, you know, and be like, this is for you, you know, and so on. And so it was a way of sort of kind of creating a vector of women writers like with this book as well. So, you know, that comes down to, you know, reading 2 books a month or, you know, what have you, as Mary was saying, but also kind of thinking intensively about some of the techniques that are popularly or conventionally assigned to various genres of writing. So thinking about deceptive narrators and, you know, what we mean when we say deceptive narrator. Inevitably, we're talking about sort of a character like Humbert, say, in Lolita, you know, Nabokov's Lolita, or Ford Madox Ford's narrator. It's rarely assigned to a female narrator. So it was much more, it was very much a sense of being indebted and immersed in contemporary literature and its connections to sort of modernist literature as well, sort of trying to see what had been overlooked and trying to embed that in this book. So, you know.
So in the story, I mean, the theme is very central to the woman. Where'd the theme come from?
I was probably feeling really grouchy, and I was raising toddlers, and I was, you know, thinking about being incarcerated.
I was sure you were for a second.
No. I mean, I did want to write a cranky female narrator, because and I love the word cranky, you know, like gals aren't allowed to be cranky. We have to be sweet or angry, you know. Cranky is just like, meh, meh, you know, sort of, you know, just having a bad day, you know. And so I wanted to kind of write that voice. And you know, and she's not always cranky. I tend to think of her as cranky, but you know, she goes from like super hopeful and optimistic to incredibly bitter as well. But most of the time it's just sort of this just irritated, you know, kind of irritable position of like, why is this happening? You know,
Where'd the psychiatric theme come from?
I think literally driving down Richmond Avenue all the time and seeing the Richardson complex.
Okay.
You know, when we moved in, it was not restored yet, you know, and, you know, it's just, and I'm actually kind of annoyed because I now know one of the docents over there, and on Easter Day, he gave this sort of extended sort of private tour of the complex. I was meant to be there and I could not make it. And so I given him some of this material, and I was like, I have to be there. And so he was showing like all kinds of spaces that normally you don't get to see on the tours that they run. But I was just fascinated and by that building, because it's the main, I guess, psychiatrist who was part of its development was a guy named Thomas Story Kirkbride, and his middle name was Story, which just knocks my socks off. And you know, he for the time he was fairly enlightened. He believed that if you were not well, then you should not be locked inside a small room all the time, you know. So that's why when you walk inside, it's not called Hotel Henry anymore, isn't it? But I think whoever now owns it changed the name. But we end up putting lots of guests up there for my series Exhibit X, and the hallways are enormous, and then the rooms are just sort of average sized. And if you notice, they also frequently like curve a little bit, I think, you know, so the idea being like that he wanted people to come out of their rooms and to be in the hallways and to you know, have moments of exchange with others, you know, in order to sort of, you know, improve their mental state. And the grounds were there. I don't think did Olmsted have something to do with the grounds?
Yeah, Olmsted,
Yeah.
just like the
Yeah.
farm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
all of this,
right.
the whole college
Yeah.
area was part of that farm where they,
Right, so the idea was that you
We're
could get outside,
outdoors,
be outside, you know,
plant
try and play,
flowers.
yes, garden. So, you know, it seems pretty enlightened for the time. And, you know, I think that probably changed as.
took a dark turn.
Yes, they all frequently See, this is what the book is about, you know, and things were light until it took a dark turn, you know, it's just, it does seem like human nature, things always end up taking a dark turn, yes.
Comment and a question. So you probably know that the hotel's supposed to be haunted. A lot of
Yes.
people
Yeah.
won't stay there because of that.
Well, I can tell you stories.
I'm sure. The question is, do you have, and I'm sorry, I have not had a chance to read your book yet. Fran has enlightened me on the book. You were speaking about your ancestry and second generation, et cetera. Is there any writers in your background in your family?
My father is a writer, but not a fiction. He majored in math because he thought it was cool. He was like, that was a bad choice. But he ended up, he wanted to be a journalist. So he was trained as a journalist. You know, he worked for the Philadelphia Bulletin and the New York Times for a time. He was a financial writer. So he was the guy that would report on, you know, stocks and things like that, or, you know, movements in various corporations. But he gave that up at some point and became, you know, in effect, like the in-house writer for various, you know, like Vanguard company, various financial corporations and things like that. So, you know, he's the person that, or he's retired now, but he was the person that would write those like little manuals on, you know, this is how you should invest in an index fund, you know, like the how-to things like that. He did write some kind of research report for the FBI on the mafia when I was a kid. I remember that. But it was mostly like kind of research writing, as it were. And so I remember as a kid, you know, I would be writing book reports for school and he would be correcting my grammar and we would have fights over grammar. I mean, it was kind of silly. But you know, when I make up words, which I frequently do, and he'll read my stuff and be like, that word doesn't exist. And I'll be like, it does now. You know? And he's learned over the time, like he'll always say it, but now he's kind of he's now a little more easygoing about that stuff, you know. There was a time when he was not easygoing about it, you know, but I learned a lot from him. So and my mother was a teacher, but yeah, no, there wasn't a lot of writing. I mean, and college, I was a classics major, you know, so I always knew I wanted to write. You just don't always know what to write about. And I think I figured out somewhere along the line that my problem was I was not interested in writing like very straight stories, realist stories. I was not interested in sort of writing about Jane and Ed and how they solved the problem of their marriage. Like, you know, not so much. And partly because I'm not sure, we tend to live with things rather than solve them, you know. Yeah.
So I have actually a question for Fran, since you read the book. Did you notice that the baby didn't have a name until they told you the baby didn't have a name? I
Did, whole
missed,
time,
Lots of names.
whole time.
I
Yeah.
totally missed the fact that the baby didn't have a name. I don't know why, but then I embarrassed myself. Wait,
That's funny. Yeah, I actually like that. Yay team.
There's a minuscule highlight that stands out in the book, and I don't know if I do the graphic description, but it's the baby when she swallows something.
Mhm.
well, that was the most bizarre part of
Wasn't
the.
that gross? But it was, I mean, it was like, but the end part was the best of what really was.
Mhm.
You must have had a child that swallowed something.
Yeah. Well, and you know what happens when you have a child that swallows something.
Oh, I do. Absolutely.
You gotta wait till it comes out the
was
other
diagnosed.
end. Yeah, no, I have to admit, parenting was like a whole thing. You know, it's just amazing how much like the details of like keeping someone alive, you know, is just, it can wreck you some days.
It can,
you know.
because one day I was changing our middle child's diaper and he pooped a penny and I started crying.
See, but you found
I
it
must-
immediately.
I
That's so
must be the
awesome.
worst mother on the face of the earth. My
You're looking
husband
for it.
said, stop crying. Well, if we get lucky, he'll start pooping quarters.
Got a little money maker there.
I thought,
So Mary, you weren't trying to find a penny, it just showed up.
That's amazing.
it was horrible.
Yeah.
No, what's
Sorry.
worse, is when you're trying to find them.
Oh, no, I did not. No.
Yeah.
It was just, it was I was totally shocked.
What is the thing that, I don't know if it's most children or the item that most children or maybe even most humans in general, because maybe they're colored by the period when they were children, choke on. What is the object that gets choked on the most?
Please don't say pennies.
Babies, or are you talking people?
I would say, I'll call it children.
Okay.
Yeah, but it might end up being everybody because of how many children do this, but I think it's just children. Yeah,
Well,
go
in
for
the
it.
previous generation was marbles.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not it, but that would make
Balloons?
sense. Yeah, what's that?
A balloon?
Nope, I like that though.
Mine did Legos years ago, little Legos.
Hot dogs.
Hot dogs
Hot dogs,
are
but
true.
that's
Oh,
a,
that's true. That's a food.
Yeah.
Yeah, not an object. It's actually safety pins.
No.
You choke on safety pins?
Yeah, well, I should
Only
be right. I'm
girls.
sorry. I shouldn't have said choke. That's I misspoke. Swallow, and there's where you have to watch coming out the other end, but yeah, swallow, but also compulsively choke, I suppose. Safety pins, because in the old days, right?
diapers.
Well,
Yeah.
Safety pins.
Oh, big
Um,
ones, yeah.
Yeah, and then they're just around, so they were just so common at one point. In fact, if you go, the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia, which is it's like a medical museum, and they just have all kinds of very uncanny artifacts, just a sort of science through the ages. They have a doll that one doctor used to teach other doctors how to extricate a safety pin from a child without damaging the child. But it's got lots of.
Is that in your next?
No, I mean, I actually think there's there's some footnotes here of all the different things people have swallowed and choked on. I had some fun with that. In fact, I think one of the writers I admire who's down at Bard, Mary Caponegro, I think she swallowed a safety pin, so it was kind of funny. But whereas I'm trying to think, I'm having but yeah, I actually don't think marbles were any of these. A lot of them were, I think with adults back in the day, it was like chicken bones a lot.
Yeah.
But oh gosh, what page is it on? I'm having this. Doesn't matter.
I had a client once that when she really wanted to protest, she'd swallow bolts. That's,
Bolts?
yeah.
Okay, that's committed.
Yeah, it always required a surgery of some kind.
I was gonna say.
Do it again. And
Oh, when she was. Okay, I actually want to know more about that story. It sounds like there's more details that you have not mentioned. I will stop. Attila the Hun. Yeah, he choked on a nosebleed.
out of what?
Died. He died because he choked on a nosebleed.
A what?
I don't know. It's what-
I know.
The story is that he died from, I think he just had like a violent nosebleed and it choked on. Probably he was asleep.
Nosebleed.
I think a lot of people were passed out drunk when they did these things, but no, I have.
Sherwood Anderson died because he swallowed a toothpick from a martini, which punctured his.
Yeah.
Who was that?
How did that?
Sherwood Anderson, the author.
Yeah, I'm surprised that one didn't make it in here. Somehow I didn't know that. But yeah, no, I have fun facts, famous chokers, like Cher choked on a vitamin pill. I mean, obviously she survived that, but.
Mama Cass.
Cass,
Yeah.
but yeah, she
Sandwich.
supposedly choked on a ham sandwich, but that's totally made up. It did not happen.
Oh.
Yeah, she did not die from choking on a ham
Oh, okay.
sandwich. I think she had she had a heart
Drugs?
attack or something like that.
There's a lot of drugs.
And possibly drugs, I can't recall now. I mean, she was doing drugs, but I think whatever, like it was heart failure and, whatever that actually, final cause did her in.
I have one more question for
Yeah.
you, and that is, this is all about life from a woman's perspective or through the woman's lens, but she had very difficult relationships with women. And it seems like the two, and I've forgotten their names, Celeste and starts with an M.
Oh, right.
Her lawyer and
right.
her counselor
Mhm.
were her advocates, but at the end, they were not.
They were not. Yeah.
Nor was her friend who was having an affair with her husband, nor was her mother.
Yeah.
So
Her mother was
she-
the worst.
her mother was the worst.
Mhm.
So she had lots of difficult relationships with other women.
Mhm.
So there wasn't that
Mhm.
kind of bond
Yeah, right.
between
No,
women.
yeah, I was really trying to isolate her in a very particular way, for sure. Her mother as the sort of the source of the Jules literary hoaxing. But then to a certain degree, the others were really just useful plot contrivances in a certain way. So because she has this technically famous celebrity past that could be useful to her lawyer and her psychiatrist were the ones who are telling her to write this novel because they want to steal it and publish it and make money off of it, right?
Mhm, right, right, right.
And they're very sweet to her. They're great to her until she finds that out, right? And then, so I had to have a kind of a reason for.
It was just kind of funny. At the end.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
at the end, when you see a movie and they tell you,
Yeah.
and then this person, this happens.
So many twists and turns, I
Yes,
know, I
yes,
couldn't
there
stop myself.
But on a very, for me, what was very profound was, I think there's nothing more hurtful than being misunderstood.
Yeah.
There's nothing, it's lonely and it's painful, and yet it's pretty much a human condition, something that we all experience. And so I felt very empathetic towards her because through the whole thing, she was misunderstood
Yeah.
every step of the way. And
Yeah.
so I felt really sad for her.
She needs sympathy. I mean, part of the reason for isolating her is exactly this reason, right? You know, she doesn't seem particularly sympathetic. Her story is a problem in so many different ways. And yet, and the effort of the book is to, in fact, hopefully create that turn. Like all this stuff has happened. Can we still feel empathy for this particular character by the end of it? And so
Yes.
I was hoping, oh, good. And that was my hope, is like, you know, what kind of story, how can I sufficiently kind of jiggle the story to make it so, you know, difficult and yet still create that connection to the reader. Yeah.
Well, it's very complex. One of the best parts in terms of advocating for her is when she talks about what she was doing that morning.
Mhm.
Juggling this and this and this,
Yeah.
this and the 20 things without any help because his husband always
Yeah.
stayed up and away and didn't help with any parenting.
Yeah.
That's like an everyday occurrence for working mothers.
I mean, it was, I'm not kidding when I say, I mean, I had, my first child never slept, like literally, like was never slept. It was just, you know, 45-minute naps, 45 every, I don't know. And it's quite like that still. You know, for someone that had like gone to graduate school and done a PhD, and like I would work from like 2 till 6 in the morning and then take like a nap all day long and then get up and work again. And suddenly it was like, okay, we have to have a routine to make this even bearable. You know, it was just a total reset. And it was astonishing to me. You know, I had children late in life, but it was like, you know, the way that children could just totally reset your relationship with everything, with this, you know, how your hours in the day, with food, with how you meet people, with your family, like all of that just gets reset. And you know, the idea of how many things you can do within the course of 5 minutes in order to kind of keep everything moving along, you know? So that stuff was very much like just total shock. Like I'm in living the shock, but I was trying to represent that ordinariness, you know, that the ordinary is so extraordinary, you know? You can come up from work, you can make a meal, you can make sure someone's having homework, and that you can plan for the next day, and you can plan for the end of the week. And you're doing that all in the course of just like 2 hours before, like, hopefully everybody goes to bed. And, you know, it's just tremendous to me. I live in admiration now. And, you know, my mother, of course, is always like, I told you so, you know? I'm like, you're right. You know, she's like, oh, I live for these words, you know? So, yeah, I mean, all power to all the moms out there for sure, you know. And dads, I mean, you know, it's literally just kind of managing someone else's life. It's a thing.
Well, thank you for joining us tonight. It's a great book, a really good read. And if you haven't read it, read it.
What about your first book?
First book, I had this rather gruesome cover for this one, but this one was my playful one, The Religious and Other Fictions. It's definitely more, I was just playing with the idea of story, how stories are told. So a lot of people just telling stories in that one.
Well,
Yeah.
when you first mentioned it, I looked it up and it's got my attention, but it's not available on Kindle or in a library.
It probably isn't. I mean, I guess.
It's on Amazon.
Is it on
It's
it?
out of-
Yeah, no, it's definitely on
out of stock.
Amazon. You know, I think the distributor like many things, I think the distributor closed and, yeah, a couple years ago, I had to buy a bunch of boxes of books just to keep them, because they're just gonna pulp.
I thought maybe you had some
everything.
today.
I had one, I happily would sell it.
Right.
Yeah, I have more at home, I didn't know. I just bought it to showcase, but it's yours. But like, just this week, they announced a major distributor, Small Press Distributions closed, and we all call it SPD for short, but basically they're the distributor that has kept many small presses, has carried many small press books for decades now. And so it's going to radically change the small press marketplace. Now that that's closed, so. These things are important.
Well, thank you. We got to.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Fran.
We have to go another.